The storm had turned the highway into a graveyard of reflections, puddles swallowing taillights, asphalt gleaming like oil under the bruised purple sky. Rain fell in sheets, so thick Claire could barely see past the hood of her car. The wipers thumped in a frantic rhythm, fighting a losing battle. She gripped the steering wheel tighter, her knuckles bone white. She wasn't supposed to be here. This road was a detour, a mistake, a path she'd taken only because her hands had steered without thought, because her mind had been elsewhere, lost in the hollow space between what was and what should have been. The radio played static, a low droning hiss that matched the numbness in her chest. Then, movement, a flicker in her periphery, something dark, shifting against the road's wet blackness. Her breath hitched. At first she thought it was just debris. A tarp, maybe, or a scrap of trash caught in the wind. But then it moved again. Not floating, not tumbling, dragging, like something alive inside it. Claire's foot eased off the gas. The car slowed. The shape resolved into a garbage bag, black, heavy, soaked through. It twitched, jerked, as if something inside was fighting to get out. Her stomach dropped. A sound escaped her lips, something between a gasp and a whisper. The car rolled to a stop, engine idling, rain hammering the roof like fists. Silence. Then, a whimper. High, thin, desperate. The kind of sound that bypasses logic and goes straight to the gut. Claire's hands shook. She didn't think. She just moved. The door swung open and the storm roared in, rain slashing her face, wind clawing at her clothes. She stumbled forward, her boots splashing through ankle-deep water. The bag was only a few feet away now, writhing like a dying animal. Her pulse pounded in her ears. What if it's nothing? What if it's something? She crouched, rain dripping from her hair, her fingers hovering over the plastic. It reeked, wet garbage, urine, something metallic underneath. Blood? The bag jerked. Claire flinched but didn't pull back. She peeled the plastic apart with trembling hands. And then she saw it. A tiny muzzle, a flash of fur, a single terrified eye staring up at her. A puppy, alive, trapped. Its ribs heaved under matted fur, its body trembling violently. One of its back legs was twisted at an unnatural angle. The other pawed weakly at the air, claws catching on the plastic. Claire's throat closed. The puppy whimpered again, the sound so small it was almost lost in the storm. She didn't speak, didn't think. She just reached in. The moment her fingers brushed its fur, the puppy flinched, a full-body spasm of fear. But it didn't snarl, didn't bite. Just stared up at her with that one wide, glassy eye, as if waiting for the next blow. Something inside Claire cracked open. She gathered the puppy into her arms, plastic and all, cradling it against her chest. Its heartbeat fluttered against her ribs, fast, frantic, like a bird trapped in a cage. Rain poured down. The highway stretched empty behind her. And in that moment, there was nothing else in the world, just the weight of this broken creature in her arms, and the terrible, crushing understanding that she couldn't leave it here. Not like this. Not alone. The rain tasted like metal on Claire's lips as she knelt on the asphalt. Water pooled in the folds of her jeans, soaking through to her knees, the cold immediate and shocking. Her breath came in ragged bursts, visible in the frigid air, each exhale a small surrender to the storm. The black bag twitched again, a violent spasm that sent rainwater sluicing off its surface. Something inside was alive, fighting, drowning in darkness. Claire's fingers hovered over the knotted plastic, trembling not just from the cold, but from something deeper, something primal. What if it's vicious? What if it's dying? The thoughts came unbidden, her pulse hammering in her throat. She hooked a finger under the twisted tie, the plastic rough against her skin. The knot resisted at first, then gave way with a wet snap. The smell hit her first. Urine, infection, the iron tang of blood. Then movement. A flash of matted fur. A whimper so soft it was nearly swallowed by the rain. Claire peeled back the plastic like she was unwrapping something sacred. The puppy lay curled in on itself, a tiny German shepherd, all ribs and matted fur. His coat, what should have been golden brown, was streaked with mud and something darker. Blood crusted around his muzzle, his paws. One eye was swollen shut, the lid purple and angry. The other stared up at her, wide and unblinking, the pupil blown black with terror. He tried to scramble backward, his front paws slipping on the wet plastic, his back legs dragging uselessly behind him. A strangled sound escaped him, not quite a bark, not quite a cry, before he collapsed, his chest heaving. Claire's hands flew to her mouth. "Oh, God!" The puppy flinched at her voice, his body tensing like he expected a blow. His good eye darted between her face and her hands, tracking every movement, every potential threat. She didn't reach for him. Not yet. Instead, she crouched there, the rain running in rivulets down her face, mixing with the hot tears she hadn't realized were falling. Her throat tightened. Who could do this? The question was a knife twisting in her chest. "Hey," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. "It's okay." The puppy didn't relax, didn't trust. But he didn't growl either, just watched her, his breath coming in shallow, panicked bursts. Slowly, Claire shrugged out of her coat, the fabric heavy with rain. She spread it on the ground beside him, a makeshift nest. "I won't hurt you," she murmured, more to herself than to him. The puppy flinched again as she moved closer, his body trembling so hard she could see each individual rib shake. But when she slid her hands beneath him, one supporting his chest, the other cradling his hindquarters, he didn't snap, didn't struggle, just went rigid, his muscles locked in anticipation of pain. He weighed nothing, less than nothing. She could feel every vertebra in his spine, every notch of his ribs. His fur was damp and filthy, his skin fever-hot beneath. Then, a flicker of movement. His tongue, pink and tentative, darted out, brushing against her wrist. Once, a question, a plea. Claire's breath caught. She pulled him against her chest, her coat wrapping around him like a shield. He didn't fight, didn't whimper, just pressed his muzzle into the crook of her elbow, his entire body shaking, not with fear now, but with exhaustion, with the sheer relief of being held. The rain fell harder. Claire didn't move. Not yet. Not until his breathing slowed. Not until she was sure he knew. He wasn't alone anymore. The sterile scent of antiseptic still clung to Ghost's fur as Claire arranged the nest of blankets in the dim glow of a single lamp. The vet's office had left its mark on both of them. The sharp medicinal smell embedded in his coat, the exhaustion weighing down her limbs. She smoothed the fleece with trembling hands, creating a shallow depression in the center, careful not to make any sudden movements. Ghost lay where she'd placed him, motionless except for the shallow rise and fall of his ribs. The cone around his neck made him look even smaller, his body swallowed by plastic and bandages. His good eye followed her as she worked, dark and unreadable. The other remained hidden beneath a crust of ointment and swelling. "He may never walk again." The words played on a loop in Claire's mind, each syllable a fresh crack in her composure. She swallowed hard, pressing her palms into the blankets to steady herself. The fabric was soft, too soft maybe. Would he even recognize comfort after what he'd endured? She glanced at the painkillers on the counter, the syringe of liquid still half full. The vet had warned her he might resist taking it. "Most animals do," she'd said, as if Ghost were just another case file, another statistic. Claire reached for the syringe, then hesitated. Ghost's ears twitched at the sound, his body tensing almost imperceptibly. She let her hand drop. "Not yet," she murmured, more to herself than to him. The apartment was too quiet. The hum of the refrigerator, the occasional drip of the kitchen faucet, each sound magnified in the emptiness. Claire sank to the floor beside the blanket nest, her back against the couch, her legs stretched out in front of her. She hadn't realized how tired she was until now, the adrenaline of the day draining away, leaving her hollow. Ghost watched her. She watched back. Minutes passed. The lamp flickered once, casting long shadows across the walls. Claire exhaled slowly, then shifted onto her side, curling her body toward him. Close, but not touching. Not yet. She could smell the infection on him, the sour tang of fear still lingering beneath the vet's clean, clinical sense. "I lost someone too," she whispered. The words hung in the air, fragile as glass. Ghost blinked. Then, slowly, painfully, he lifted his head. Just an inch. Just enough to tilt his muzzle toward her. His nostrils flared, testing her scent, her truth. Claire didn't move, didn't breathe. A gust of wind rattled the window pane, sending a shudder through the apartment. Ghost's eye never left her face. She reached out, her fingers hovering just above his shoulder, waiting. His exhale warmed her palm before she even touched him. When her fingers finally sank into his fur, matted in places, still damp from the rain, he didn't flinch, didn't retreat. Just let his head sink back onto the blankets, his eye drifting shut. Claire's throat tightened. She stayed like that for hours, her hand resting lightly on his side, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her fingertips. The lamp burned low. The night deepened. Somewhere around 3 a.m., Ghost sighed, a long, shuddering breath that seemed to come from the very depths of him. Claire closed her eyes. For the first time in months, she didn't feel alone. The morning light slanted through the blinds, painting stripes across the hardwood floor where Ghost lay sprawled in his usual spot. Claire knelt beside him, her hands already warmed from rubbing them together, the faint scent of lavender massage oil clinging to her skin. "Okay, buddy," she murmured, fingers hovering above his atrophied hind legs. "Let's try again." Ghost lifted his head, his one good eye tracking her movements with quiet resignation. The fur along his back legs had grown patchy from weeks of therapy, the muscles beneath still too thin, too weak. Claire's thumbs found the grooves along his tendons, pressing in slow circles the way the physical therapist had shown her. Flex, release, flex, release. Ghost didn't whimper, didn't protest. Just watched her with that same endless patience, his breath steady despite the tremors running through his limbs. The only sign of discomfort was the occasional twitch of his whiskers when she hit a particularly tight knot of scar tissue. Claire's fingers memorized the landscape of his injuries, the ridge of an old fracture near his hip, the strange looseness in his left knee. She worked until her own shoulders ached, until the oil had soaked into his fur, leaving it dark and clumped in places. "One more stretch," she whispered, guiding his leg through its limited range of motion. Ghost's paw twitched in her palm, the pad still soft from lack of use. Then, a shift, a tension. Claire froze. Ghost's hindquarters bunched beneath him, muscles quivering with sudden effort. His front legs braced, claws scraping against the floorboards. "Ghost?" He pushed, and stood. Not the drunken lurch of their first attempts. Not the pitiful scramble that ended in immediate collapse. This was deliberate. Unsteady, yes, but unmistakably standing. His paws splayed for balance, his entire body trembling with the effort, but his spine was straight, his head held high. Claire's hands hovered in the air between them, afraid to touch, afraid to breathe. Sunlight caught the dust motes swirling around them, the entire world narrowing to this single, impossible moment. Ghost took a step. His left leg buckled immediately, his claws catching on the wood as he went down. Claire lunged forward but stopped herself just short of catching him. He needed to learn how to fall, the therapist had said. Needed to trust his own body again. Ghost lay panting for a moment, his sides heaving. Then he turned his head and looked at her, his tongue lolling in what might have been exhaustion, or maybe, just maybe, something like pride. Claire's vision blurred. She pressed her forehead against his, her tears soaking into the fur between his ears. His breath was warm and smelled faintly of the chicken treats she'd given him earlier. "You're so brave," she whispered, the words cracking in her throat. Ghost hesitated. Then his rough tongue swiped once across her damp cheek. A fleeting touch, gone before she could even process it. Outside, a bird sang. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere in the building, a door slammed. Claire stayed there, forehead to forehead with this broken creature who had somehow become the most whole thing in her life, and let the moment stretch. Neither of them moved. Neither of them needed to. The park smelled of cut grass and impending rain. Claire stood at the edge of the open field, the leash hanging limp in her hand, her pulse pounding in her throat. Ghost sat beside her, his muscles coiled tight beneath his golden fur, his nostrils flaring as he took in the scents carried on the breeze. She could feel the tension radiating off him, the way his shoulders quivered, how his claws kneaded the earth in restless anticipation. His healed eye, now bright and clear, fixed on the expanse of green before them with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Okay," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Her fingers fumbled with the clasp of his harness. The metal clicked open, the sound barely audible over the rustling leaves. Ghost didn't move. Claire swallowed. The last time he'd been unrestrained in open space, he'd been dragging himself across wet asphalt in a garbage bag. Now, standing on strong legs, legs that had carried him through months of therapy, of setbacks, of quiet victories, he waited. For permission, for courage, for something she couldn't name. "Go," she breathed. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, Ghost launched forward. His first strides were hesitant, his gait still slightly uneven where the damaged muscles hadn't fully recovered. But then his body remembered. His hind legs pushed harder, his spine lengthening as he found his rhythm. Claire's hands flew to her mouth as he gained speed, his ears streaming behind him like banners, his tail a proud flag. He wasn't graceful. Not like the border collies that darted across the park with precision. Not like the greyhounds that moved like liquid. His run was lopsided, his right leg kicking out slightly wider than the left, but it was his. Entirely his. Claire's vision blurred. The sunlight caught his coat as he ran, turning the gold to fire, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. Then Ghost pivoted. His paws skidded on the grass as he turned, his entire body arcing back toward her in a wide, joyful curve. He ran faster now, his tongue lolling, his eyes locked on hers. Claire barely had time to drop to her knees before he crashed into her, his full weight knocking her backward onto the grass. His paws planted on either side of her shoulders, his warm breath puffing against her face as he licked her cheeks, her nose, her chin, each touch a brand, a promise. Claire wrapped her arms around him, feeling the wild thrum of his heartbeat against her chest, the way his entire body wriggled with unrestrained joy. A laugh burst from her, raw and unexpected, followed immediately by tears. Ghost whined softly and nuzzled her ear as if to say, "Why are you crying when we're finally free?" Claire buried her face in his neck, inhaling the scent of sunshine and grass and the faint musk that was uniquely Ghost. The grass prickled through her shirt, the earth solid beneath her. Somewhere nearby, children shouted, a bicycle bell rang, but all she could hear was Ghost's panting breaths. All she could feel was the weight of him pressing her into the present moment. For the first time in years, the hollow space inside her didn't ache. For the first time in years, she was exactly where she was meant to be. The sunset painted the porch in molten gold, the kind of light that made everything look both fragile and eternal. Claire sat in the weathered rocking chair, the wood creaking softly beneath her. Ghost lay at her feet, his once golden muzzle now frosted with white, his breathing slow and deliberate. The scar above his brow, the one from that first terrible night, had faded to a silver thread, barely visible unless you knew where to look. She did. Her fingers found it automatically, tracing the familiar ridge as she had 1,000 times before. His fur, thinner now, still carried the same warmth beneath her fingertips. Ghost sighed, the sound deep and contented, his body pressing heavier against her foot. "You saved me, you know," she whispered. The words hung between them, carried on the scent of lavender from the garden, the distant hum of cicadas tuning up for evening. Ghost's ear twitched at her voice, but his eyes remained closed. The rise and fall of his ribs was slower now than in his youth, each breath a conscious effort. Claire's thumb stroked the velvety spot between his ears, the way she'd done when he was just a broken puppy trembling in her coat. His tail thumped once against the porch boards, not the wild, joyful beats of his prime, but a quiet acknowledgement. "I hear you." A breeze stirred the wind chimes hanging by the door, their hollow notes drifting over them. Ghost's nose lifted slightly, sniffing at the air, and for a moment Claire saw the shadow of the young dog he'd been, alert, curious, alive with possibility. Then he settled again, his chin resting on his paws, his body curling closer to her. She slid from the chair to the floor, ignoring the protest of her knees, and pressed her forehead against his. His breath was warm on her cheeks, carrying the familiar scent of his favorite treats, of grass, of home. His good eye, still so bright, still so his, opened halfway, meeting hers. Claire didn't speak, didn't need to. The years stretched between them, not as distance, but as layers, countless mornings, shared silences, the way he'd always known when to nudge her hand with his nose, when to rest his head in her lap. Ghost's tongue flicked out just once, brushing the tip of her nose, a ghost of his old mischief. Claire smiled even as the tears came. The sunset deepened, the gold bleeding into purple at the edges. Somewhere down the lane a child laughed, the sound bright and fleeting. Ghost's breathing slowed further, his body growing heavier against her. She wrapped her arms around him, her face buried in the scruff of his neck, and held on. Not to keep him here, not to stop time, just to say without words, "I'm here. I'll stay." And when the last light faded, when the fireflies began their dance above the lawn, Claire knew, some love doesn't end. It simply changes form. Because the greatest love stories aren't about grand gestures or perfect moments. They're found in the quiet spaces between heartbeats, in trembling hands peeling back a garbage bag, in midnight massages given with aching fingers, in old dogs who still try to lick away your tears. They're written in scars that fade but never disappear, in paw prints left on a soul, in the way a single rescued moment can stretch into a lifetime. And when the last light fades, what remains isn't goodbye. Just the eternal echo of a promise whispered in the rain. "I'm here. I'll stay."